Hello everyone, welcome to my favorite part of every single playthrough, the review for The Legend of Sword and Fairy 4. So we just finished the game about 45 minutes ago. Oh man, that was a long game, that's for sure. It took us 3 hours and 45 minutes to finish the last episode. So, 各位观众们，今天我们现在要评价这个游戏，这个《仙剑奇侠传四》。但是对不起，要用英文，因为反正观众最主要的观众是讲英文的。Alrighty then, so let's see if So since this is my favorite part of the review of the playthrough, let's go ahead and get started. So normally when I do a game review, I usually separate it into story, gameplay. Hello, Illusion Queen. I usually separate the criteria into story, graphics, sound, gameplay, and of course, and gameplay / controls. Yes. So we might as well just stay here on the screen, and you can see that I cannot load from. Yeah, all those levels you get during the boss really don't help you very much at all. So I guess we'll first start off with like the series strength, which is the story, right? Everyone always talks about how the Legend of Sword and Fairy has really great story. And this game is certainly no different. So, one thing I did, like, with these kind of games, a lot of times the game's faults have to match up to... A lot of the game's faults are kind of covered up by, like, by the story. I said the same thing for The Legend of Sword and Fairy 1 way back 4 years ago. Oh my gosh, is it really that long ago? Yeah, I was saying that if it worked for the story, the game would be a bad game. In this case, for Legend of Sword and Fairy 4, the story is certainly among... I just realized that the menu is the secret Cirrus platform. Oh, it's fine. The 卷云台, yep. So, with regards to this, I think one nice thing about the story for The Legend of Sword and Fairy 4 is that there was maybe 1 or 2 times we got a little bit like sidetracked, but usually it had something to do with like a moral message they wanted us to remember for later in the story, so it's not too terrible. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that at least it's paced well. One thing about this game is that if you notice, all the dialogue is always very, like, they're very poignant, or it's very like something very important. So there are some games I've seen from the in the wuxia, like xinxia games where sometimes they'll focus on trying to make a scenario really funny, and oftentimes it just takes forever to build up. I think there's like a few times I've seen that in other places where I'm like, okay, I get it, this is the funny part, can we get on with it? It's not funny, it's taking up time, and it's just slowing the game down. So in this case, like, there's always important information like you can glean from the dialogue. I know that there's like maybe 1 or 2 chatters who are like, oh, why does this game have so much writing story? And then, like, I agree that there's a lot of dialogue to go through, but it's always stuff that's really important to the thing, and it really like pushes the game. You never feel like... I don't ever remember like the game is like... It's really well balanced. There's some jargon, like there's some like 专用词, like just like things that are dedicated for the game, but it's never like so much that I don't care, or it's just like it takes forever to sift through. And especially for us who are like... I mean, we were translating it, so the game did slow down because we were translating. So that's not really fair, because we're helping you guys and telling you about the story and telling you every single story beat, because it's really important and it really pushes the story along. So at least at least the game feels well written. Like, definitely it's definitely an improvement compared to 3 and 3.5 and definitely 2, but I don't want to think about that game. Okay, fine, it's not that bad, but it's certainly probably one of the weakest. And this game, like, they tied a lot of things together, and there were just honestly really gut-wrenching moments. You're just like, oh, 好同情你们啊, just like that kind of like feeling where like, oh, I really pity you, or like, oh, I feel so bad, and you feel like their genuine struggle, and like people, like the characters genuinely want to do the right thing, and you feel a lot of good chemistry among the characters, which makes like the journey really enjoyable. And when you lose like Meng Li at one point, it's painful. It's really painful, and you get to see her the real one again in the ending, and of course we're very delighted. Even if it's 100 years, it did take a while, but it was a nice way to like cap off. And although like we didn't, and so we at first I was like, oh no, the ending we're not gonna see what happens because it's 100 years, but like, oh, okay, it actually for the 4 of them it kind of worked out. And many people theorize that Ling Sha is Su Yu's reincarnation. Oh, Gong Chan, yes, the supervisor, yeah, way back. Oh yeah, no, we don't know if Ling Sha is Su Yu's reincarnation. I thought that too, but the game never confirms it. The name never confirms it, and it's probably not really. We don't have there. If that would be such an important thing to mention in the game, they would have. So I don't think they did. You definitely do see like, I mean, some of them like it's tropes from like martial arts are like, oh well, there's always a concept of like it reminds me of like 3 Side Story with the whole like thing of like, oh, she got married to the guy, like, well in this case it was like the woman, like in this case Su Yu was married to not the person she didn't love the most, but yeah, I mean that's just like stuff that happens in other Legend of Sword and Fairy games, as well as other like wuxia and xinxia games as well. The other thing, is there anything else? So most likely not. Yeah, the game would have confirmed it. Because, like, one thing about the game is very like keen on like making sure you understand like everyone's relations, and I actually did enjoy the fact that they like basically like just told everything that happens in the game is always for like really good reasons, and you're like, oh, so that's why they did that. Oh, no wonder like they. So that's why he was sealed, and just like crazy things like that. Is there anything else that I want to say? I like the fact that the game's moral is all about like how like humans and monsters are living things, and like of course the Legend of Sword and Fairy Shinjian has always been about that, where it's like, hey, you know, just because they're monsters doesn't mean they're like all evil, and like the martial arts skills insist that it's the case. And then here in this game they basically just say straight up say like, okay, you guys are idiots. What are you just killed a bunch of innocent monsters for no good reason. So how do you like, you're not doing what you think you're doing. What did you think? And yes, the other thing is the game's basically anti cultivating immortality. It's sort of like treated as this like, this is just this human folly, or like everyone believes they can be immortal and they can put away material desires. And then like even things like the dream tapers in the Huanming realm were talking about like, hey, you know, like we scan all those, we look at the dreams of all those people, and they're all just like regular people. They have their own likes and dislikes, and they even though they think they're different, but they're not. They can't really actually put away their desires. That's what makes you human, or makes you a living thing too. And even the people seeking immortality were not like good people in the end. Some of them were just like, are you serious? You just actually like, did they not teach you to value your fellows like humans? And it's just, yeah, this is kind of an exercise in showing hypocrisy. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's no Nuwa descendants at all in this game. Unlike in Sword and Fairy. Well, Sword and Fairy 2, you don't have spirit orbs, you don't go out Shu Mountain. You only meet one person from Shu Mountain once, and that's like a really like not very important, like it's a side quest, so it's not even a main story thing. And there's no Nuwa descendants in Sword and Fairy 4. I guess I was gonna say like it does not remind me of Sword and Fairy 2. Sword and Fairy 2, Legend of Sword and Fairy 2 was not Like there were shenanigans, and you can tell. Legend of Sword and Fairy 4, on the other hand, is much better written, for sure. And so, yeah, if you are like interested in the story after you've seen it here, you should definitely give it a go. Do I have any favorite moments? I mean, I joke about like the K-drama moments, but always like the things where like whenever any of the like the female characters like express their feelings, it was always very like, oh shoot, this is really important. I really wanted to pay attention. I may have made fun of it in those things, but I'm like, oh, finally I can hear what their real feelings are. And I think the nice thing is that it's kind of subtle, where you're not like, oh, everyone's fawning over, like, you know, like in some other media you can have like, oh, the girls are clearly in love with one guy, and it's very like lovey-dovey, and like you're just like, will they, won't they? But it was more like, everyone can act like normal people around each other. Like even these 4 friends can like be normal, and like that's like, because that's a more natural human action. It's natural human reaction. Who would have thought that everyone's not always like, no, it's not a romantic comedy. Everyone can be, when things aren't like, when you're hanging out with people, you can still be yourself, even if you have like feelings for the other person, and like it's totally fine. It feels natural. Everyone has like natural chemistry with each other. It's great. It's just really great to see like you can still have friends of like opposite, like, I know, like even in Chinese society we kind of like, oh, can men really and women really be friends? It is possible. It's totally possible. Even in like Chinese society, like they can be each other's friends, and like you can have your, you don't have to be in love with everybody. And it's really awesome. It really like makes you feel like the characters like come more alive, so to speak. I mean, there's some funny moments in the game too, but it's always like, it's never like done way over the top. It's just like really silly, and like, but it's definitely still in character. So yeah, the game's just well written. I don't know who like, I guess they were really on point. And I don't really have anything really bad to say that I can think of, because I was like thinking about like, oh, is the ending okay? But yeah, the ending's great. I was like, there's nothing. We got a really complete story, and I guess the only thing is you don't know what happened with Xin Xiao, or the Kunlun Guild, but I have no idea if they'll ever come back to that. They kind of leave it like whatever. They're all gonna suffer regardless for their actions. And it is nice to know what happened in the end, and we got to see Mengli again one more time for the game, so you're like not like, oh, did she ever come back? And it's great. So yes, the story is probably one of the strongest parts of the game for sure, and like the writing is definitely really on point. The dialogue's all on point. I don't have many bad things. I can't think of many bad things to say. That's how good I'm thinking the game is. It's definitely up there for sure. Right, everyone had their own stories. That's the other thing, is like everyone has their own stories. Even the side quests were good. I'm actually really impressed that most of the side quests, I'm just like, oh my goodness, it's actually have like, I felt that emotional impact too. And so yay. I mean, I already had huge expectations coming off from like just seeing the game for an hour or two of the game played way back when, before I had start playing myself. So I was like, oh shoot, this is good. So yeah, let's move on to, now that I've rattled on and on about this, let's go for the graphics of the game. Alright, I will have to be frankly really honest about it. It's not great. Like the portrait work is good, like the 2D, like the actual art, 2D art is really nice, but no, it's compared to where this, like, okay, this is a fault I have with a lot of like Chinese developed games in general, from Softstar in particular. Their amount of like polish for graphics is severely lacking from where it should be in comparison to like their peers in like other countries. I mean, here's the thing. This came out the same year Assassin's Creed did, and it's like so far behind. The character movements are really stiff. The animation's just not up to par. And I really feel bad, genuinely bad, because I'm like, this should be, like, the story is really good. It's just, the graphics just can't keep up with it, too. Like, they have really nice portraits, but the graphics are stiff, the animations are stiff, the battle animations are stiff. Everything's just stiff. It's just doesn't, it's not well, it doesn't look good. Even the character models don't look that good either. They're really, really primitive in comparison to... look, I'm not expecting everything to be Assassin's Creed, okay? Like, that's not fair. Ubisoft is like 4 times larger than Softstar is, probably. Nah, probably 5 times. Because Softstar is a very small company. But it's like, you can... Like, there were so many things they could have, like... They could have at least tried to be closer to maybe like Atelier, Rorona. Well, maybe that might be too early. Even like Gust for a company their size is actually looks okay in comparison. And so yeah, the animations are real. Like, it's just unfortunate that it's just not good looking. And like, they're good enough to figure out what you need to do, but like sometimes it just looks really, really rough. It's aliased. And it's just not a good look. And I feel sad for dinging it. And that's like... Is it game-breakingly bad? No, not necessarily. At the very least, I can at least say that... But unlike previous games, it's clear where you need to walk to. But there are certain times where you don't know if you can walk over something. It's the problem is less than it was in the previous games, but it's still there, and it's still annoying when you have to try to figure out where you can walk and where you can't walk. Like especially in the last dungeon, there were like a few parts where like, I don't know, I walked up here and I'm stuck. Why can't I walk through this gap? And then you have to go, oh no, it's the other gap you have to walk through. And I'm in the final dungeon, and that's actually really annoying as well. And is there anything else? And yeah, because like the animations are bad, it lessens the impact of some story scenes. And sometimes you basically have to just read what they... You have to read what they did because the animations aren't expressive enough, the characters aren't expressive enough on the 3D models, and you're just like, oh. So it's just a little disappointing for where it should be at this time at the year it came out, 2006. So... it's kind of unfortunate, and it is a detraction against the game. So anything else? Let's see. I think I've beaten the game in far enough. So let's talk about sound in this case. So the sound effects are good enough. They're unique sounding, that's for sure. And the game is... The music's really nice. It's always been really nice. They've always been amped. It always amps you up, especially like when you have tense moments, poignant moments, or where you're talking about something very emotional. So, oh my goodness, yes. And it is also nice that this is the first game that's been fully voiced. So it is nice that they added it so that you can actually hear the characters, which really do help. I also should compliment all the voice actors for really going all out and like giving the characters more character, so to speak. And so you could definitely and the acting is really good. It's China. They have, I will say that China, it has really great voice actors. And they did not spare the budget on this one either, because you have some prominent voice actors in this, actresses. They do a really good job of like expressing the character. You can feel it too, and that definitely helps a lot with some of the story scenes as well. It kind of has to make up for the fact that the graphics suck, but at least the voices are good, so that certainly helps. What else I gotta say again? Why I blanked for a second. Ah, yes. So the monster voice effects are better. They're all right. At least they're less mismatching. I can't think of one where I was like, wow, this is severely mismatched. The impact of the sound effects are still as powerful as they've always been. They still sound really great. The sounds are unique for sure, giving you that feeling of being in fantasy ancient China. I mean, we're listening to the great title screen music right now. That's super nice. And so you definitely feel that this game, like, it definitely like helps to invoke that atmosphere when you're playing this game, and you still feel like, oh, I'm going on a fantastical journey, or like, oh shoot, things are going crazy. And yes, they use the drama music from Legend of Sword and Fairy 1, Shenzhen 1, but you know, it's fine. And yes, yeah, Xuan Xiao had this whole like, hmm. Yes, Xuan Xiao did not sound like a generic. Didn't have a generic voice. So yeah, I really don't have anything bad to say. I can't think of any time where I'm like, wow, I hate these sound effects, or I hate this music. So it really helps to evoke the atmosphere. As always, Legend of Sword and Fairy has, even 3, 3.5, and 2, have always had really great music that you're like, oh, that's really nice. And each character has their own theme, like they do in this game. And yeah, I don't really have anything bad to say. Wow, I know I'm actually struggling for bad things to say about it, which is good. That's a good sign. Oh yes, and if all the OSTs of the game onto YouTube, thank you. Yeah, definitely link me to it, and I will post it, because now that we're done with the game, everyone should have heard every single track at this point. Okay, so let me move on to gameplay, the final part of the final component. So I'm kind of mixed on this one, honestly. On the one hand, the battle system has been simplified again from the Legend of Sword 3 side story, because you can no longer cancel. You cannot cancel an action anymore. So you just, the bar is basically to tell you who's coming next. So it's a little bit more FF10-ish. Nah, it's more like active time battle. It's kind of weird. I don't know how to explain it. It's a little bit unusual. It's just, but like the actual, like what actually happens is more like it's just a determined like turn order. One thing I mean, it is sad that we lost a little bit of uniqueness, but the nice thing they've done is that for the gameplay, on the gameplay side, your animation does not stop. Like everyone will animate. And they'll wait for every battle animation to finish before going to the next person's turn. So you don't remember in 3 side story there was this stupid thing where sometimes you would cast a spell and all of a sudden the enemy would start moving towards you because it was their turn to attack, and it was just like this jankiness where you can't tell if you're going to hit because some spells took so long to animate you would miss. That's not the case in this game. Every hit is going to like be hit because you have to, every battle animation goes in order, so it's actually like really, so you just have much better control about when an attack is going to hit. You don't have to worry about like, oh, I'm going to we're gonna have like the character move up and attack and like miss the monster because the monster went and moved to attack you. That stuff was so janky. I never liked when that happened, and at least they fixed that. That's a huge help for like strategizing too, because you can figure out, I'm most likely gonna get hit by this thing, what do I do? And that's great for strategy. The other thing I want to mention is that, yeah, the follow-ups are pretty interesting, so in a way to keep the battles continually interesting, you can always have that. It reminds me a little bit of like when you're playing Paper Mario back then, but it's different. But like I love the follow-up attacks. They really do help to make the battles a bit more exciting. The other thing I want to mention is, what do I have to say about the camera? I hate this game's camera. I really do. So one thing I don't like about this game is that the camera is fixed behind your character, and I got used to it after a while, but it's just not a good way to address. And sometimes you would end up not being able to see your character because they would go behind a wall, and it's like, oh, it's like they didn't study other like 3D games about how to do camera. They just used the most like simplest and like less to try to make it less buggy, but it just it doesn't work very well. It doesn't. It really is like some of the worst parts of the game is dealing with that camera. I also want to mention that yeah, there's some bugginess. I like the whole like keyboard doesn't work sometimes. There's graphical things that are very weird. Yeah, the game's a little bit patchworked. There's some compatibility issues with the audio on yeah, your character's face gets stuck in the wall. I think the other thing is janky is when enemies can attack you from behind the wall, which doesn't make any sense. So there's like no collision detection. And like the game it's better than it was before, but like it's an improvement in some sense, but I just yeah, that drove me crazy when enemies can touch you from behind the wall, or when like you have and you could get stuck in places, or like your keyboard doesn't work, or sound goes out in MV. It's just not. And there's also the bug where like if the game crashes, your sound goes mute, and it just contributes to this sense of jankiness. It just feels janky. Like it doesn't feel well knit. It feels like the game's gonna fall apart at sometimes. And there's also times where like you just walk and then like it stops the load, so the loading isn't very dynamic as it should be. So it doesn't, when you're walking to things, it just like stops for a moment while it's being loading. And like this computer is not even that. This computer is way newer than excuse me, this game is, so it shouldn't have trouble running it. I don't understand. I also struggle a bit with like how I feel about certain battles. So there's this battle like during the game. There were two battles I had. Yeah, I don't know. It's just compatibility issues. It's just PC gaming in general. So maybe it's not a ding against the programming, but it's very weird that I had problems on my end with this computer. One thing I didn't like, it was when I was playing some of the battles. I think the worst one, there were some battles that are just like poorly planned. Like there's one where it's so annoying. You literally have to sit and wait and you can't do anything in the name of artificial difficulty, which is the battle with the invisible with the deer that casts invisibility, which is the worst. Those enemies are the worst to deal with. Like it's just there to be really, really annoying. Like, and they can cast invisibility on themselves and others, and it's just like, why? So you just sit there and wait, and you have to wait for random so that they won't, if they cast invisible again, you just have to wait more. So it's essentially a battle designed to waste time and waste resources, and it's not hard because you made dumb decisions. It's hard because the game, it's random. It's just purely random, and it sucks. Like, that is the worst. I hate that boss battle. Is like the severe worst. The only other one I can think of is the fact that the final boss does this attack that stops you from healing yourself, so you just have to sit and take it. It's kind of dumb, and I thought that was like a terrible idea. Like that's one of the worst final boss battles I've ever had to play on a turn-based game. Like, it's not even your skill, it's just like you're just praying. You're just trying to struggle, and you're just using items. It could also be that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that one. I just don't think it's well designed, whereas like a final boss battle should be hard but fun, and it's just not very fun. I think a lot of things is like, this game's, it's kind of partially some of the things that contribute to this problem is the fact that the game is tuned. Okay, unlike, it's kind of the opposite of how it was in the previous game. In Legend of Sword Fairy 3 and 3 Side Story, the game was tuned so that you would gain levels so fast. So you were almost always going to be overpowered, even if you didn't, like, just not running away and like fighting certain battles. Like, you're not even like, you grinding, and you would just get so strong that the enemies would be so trivial, and then you would just be like really, really strong for bosses, and you were like, oh, it's not that bad. But in this game, they changed it so that you have to level a lot more, and it takes a lot longer to, not a lot longer, but it takes longer to get levels in general. So it's tuned to like, you need to like grind a little bit more. And I don't know how I feel. I feel like it's maybe just a little bit too hard. Like in this case, like think about how long I had to spend in the final dungeon just to get to level an okay enough level to fight the final boss. Like that's maybe a little too much, but at least I will compliment them. Like there was a lot of good design decisions as well, like the ability to, I do like thank them for, there was a big problem before where you could not save at any time. So at least this game they have quick saves as a consumable item if you need it, so you have to think about when you want to use it, but you can still have that option, and you can save before like difficult encounters. And there's also a lot of save points in dungeons themselves before like very key moments, and that's for the most part. I think most of the dungeons were pretty good about it. There's some dungeons where like, oh, it's kind of long. And I guess the other thing about this game is like there's one or two dungeons that are probably way too long, but for the most part the dungeons are about like a good amount of length as well, and you can still get away from enemies, which is kind of nice. And I also appreciate the invincibility when you're trying to get away, after you've gotten away from an enemy. And like, yeah, the saving is like an awesome thing. Like I cannot compliment. I'm like, thank you for putting save points. Thank you for being mindful about the player experience. Even like the having the quick save is really, really nice. I also appreciate that the dungeons where they try to give you a bit more to do, like the puzzles are alright. Like those are actually kind of fun to like do them. I know some people don't like puzzles, but I do. But I'm also coming from, I played Zelda, Zelda 传说. Yeah, I know those are like games I'm probably pretty familiar with. So it's kind of nice to have something to break up the monotony of just like running through a dungeon and you're just like, oh, where's the exit? There's only like one or two dungeons that are kind of I didn't really like the one you dropped in holes. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was terrible. So, but for the most part, that's like just one exception. So maybe hopefully for the next game they'll fix it and make all the dungeons at least reasonable. Who knows? But yeah, for the most part, like, yeah, the dungeons are much more engaging. So I'm like, I was like, and there's a lot of them, but there's always one other thing I noticed is that the game is very good at putting enough story between dungeons, and making dungeons like relevant enough that you don't feel like, oh, this dungeon is a waste. Why am I here? Like there was a lot of reasons to go to certain dungeons, and like, or there's a lot of story interspersed to break up the dungeons as well, so you're never like, oh, I've been playing 6 dungeons in a row and I'm bored. I'm losing my engagement, or I'm losing my sense of like I care. And I think that's one thing they took to heart from like 3 and 3 Side Story. 3 Side Story was particularly okay. I feel bad for kicking it again, but 3 Side Story had a lot of things where there were so many dungeons and so little story in between, so it was just dreadful to sit through. It was not fun to play. It was just I dreaded every single dungeon, and that's different. But in this game, it was different. Cause I'm like, oh, every time we do a dungeon, there's always something like, oh, whoa, that's really cool, or like, oh, shoot, something is about to happen, something significant has just happened. And like they managed to pace it well, where like even though the game is a little longer than the previous games, it doesn't feel that way, because like the story is always going throughout this. They did whoever did plan this, like they did a really good job. Right, exactly. The terrible dungeon in 3.5. Like Like 3.5 story is not bad at all if you just took it without the dungeons, but oh, gosh darn it, like they were really poor. It's really poorly paced. That game is terribly paced. I was literally dreading, wanting to get off that game at a certain point. That was how bad I was feeling. I felt really bad, but like 4 was a different story where I'm like, what's gonna happen next? I mean, like, I noticed that I've been playing the game for a long time, but like, I'm like, oh shoot, what's gonna happen next? I'm always interested to know what's gonna happen. And when we came to the end, it was just like a culmination of everything. So yeah, great. The game's like not perfect, and the controls are. Oh yeah, and let me talk about the controls for a little bit. They're all right. It's moving the characters okay. It's a little stiff. I'd almost have preferred like. They should have had controller support for certain things. I know you need like mouse control, but like movement, if you could use a stick, that would be a lot more graceful. Using the using keyboard with this game to move is kind of not really my thing. Not really as awesome. You don't feel as free, and the movement, the character movement is way too slow, in my opinion. I feel like it could have been a lot faster, so it just becomes a chore to walk around certain places. That's one thing I would ding the game on, for making my life, making everything slower. It should have been a lot faster, because it doesn't make any difference anyway. You don't. It's not random encounters, so you could just get to the monsters faster. That would have been really nice. I would have preferred that. And yeah, the controls were better. That would certainly help. It just doesn't feel. It just feels stiff. It's just like this game's just all about stiffness. And like, it's not so bad, but it is something that it gets in the way of enjoying the enjoyable parts of the game, the story parts, and doing the engaging with the dungeons and walking around. So yeah, that's about all I have for gameplay as far as I know. And like, getting lost sucks too, by the way. But that's a normal complaint for a lot of these type of games. Okay, so finally we've come to the last part. Like, how do I feel about like this game? Would I recommend it to people? And I usually say, like, after considering everything, I usually just say thumbs up something, or buy, thumbs up rent, or thumbs down rent, or thumbs down in general. So I don't use numerical distinctions, because I think numbers are very useless. They don't tell you. People just get fixated on numbers, and I don't like them because they don't tell me anything qualitative. Like, there's no way to like say, like, it's like games are not a math. It's not a math's problem. You can't just solve it with that. So for me personally, I think, you can't rent this game. This is gonna take too long. If you're borrowing it, it's gonna take a long time. For me, in spite of the faults, I still think it's, if you're an RPG player, and like, for sure, this is still a thumbs up buy. I think that even though there are some faults with the game's graphics and gameplay and the controls, it's not bad enough that I would say, like, wow, this game is terrible. If this were the story, unlike Legend of Sword Fairy 1, where the gameplay was not up to par with this awesome story, this game's gameplay is a lot. They took a lot of feedback from previous games, and they fixed a lot of it. So it's a huge improvement in gameplay compared to like the earlier games in the series. So that actually makes me want to recommend it more to, like, especially for like if you're just an RPG player, like, you can definitely like get a lot out of it, even in spite of the bad parts. And a lot of times you can probably get around some of the game's more difficult, annoying fights if you have the right levels and the right equipment. So that's one thing. Oh yeah, I should mention the gameplay. Yeah, there is a lot of options you can forge. At least there's a lot of options to deal with some of the difficult enemies with like the right anti-poison or anti-element, and that's really useful, especially like against some of the stronger the optional bosses and the final boss. That would probably have been nice. Anyway, so for this game, it's a thumbs up buy for RPG players. I think you will just get a lot out of it, and even if the jankiness doesn't bother you, and it shouldn't, because it doesn't get that in. It gets in the way of the game, but not so much that the game's a chore to play. So yeah, that's awesome. That's great. If you don't like RPGs, it might be on the little bit on the long side. If you're essentially playing for the story will help you a lot. But if you're not an RPG, if you don't like turn-based, then maybe this isn't for you. It is on the long side, so you might almost be served better by watching a playthrough or listening to my playthrough if you're an English speaker. If you are a Chinese speaker, you probably can just find any of the Let's Players. Like, this game's been Let's Played to death on Youku as well as like and you probably can find some streams. Well, actually, I don't know. You don't really find streams on Douyu. Douyu is not really. You don't see too much of this game considering how old it is. Anything else I want to say? So yeah, if you are, I would just like check it out and see how you feel, how open-minded you are to this type of game. For most players, but if you're an RPG player, you definitely should play it. This is one of the few games. It's definitely it's worth the experience. And the story is very meaty and like it's long but very satisfying to go through. I love it. Like, this is probably, in terms of like the games in the series, and like I think the story can certainly match up to the first game, and the gameplay is better. So in the essence, this is a better game. It's much better gameplay experience. You will not go wrong with this. And yeah, there you go. This is probably the best. Really, probably the best game in the series in terms of just the full experience. So good job, Softstar. I normally would say, well, I hope the next game is going to be good, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway, so that concludes my review. I think I'm done with talking about the game. I think we've covered pretty much everything I could think of, from like just my raw emotions from finishing the game. It's still like, wow, I'm actually done. We actually had a great time. So I will now talk about future games. Legend of Sword and Fairy 5, a great review, thank you. So Legend of Sword and Fairy 5